Valorant community, it's time to talk. Consider this my intervention for the Valorant community. I do love this community, I want to make that very clear, but I have a lot of problems with this community and the discourse that surrounds it. This community definitely has a lot of great people in it, a lot of people that really care about the game, that really care about the esport, that want to see it succeed. However, there are some common community narratives and talking points that I personally find frustrating, so I wanted to talk about it all in this video. So this is the board we have today. We will be slowly revealing all the talking points that I have, and we're going to be starting with something recent within the community, and that is the cheating scandal. And this scandal came from Sean Garris, who is a community content creator as well as team manager for Shopify Rebellion. He stated that there was a, quote, match-fixing ring going on within North American Tier 2 Valorant. And it was a really big deal because if there is match-fixing going on in Tier 2 Valorant, that is a massive problem. You absolutely should not be match fixing if you are a pro Valorant player, a pro esports player at all. You should not be doing that. This is not exclusive to Valorant. This has happened in many other different esports as well as regular sports. And with this current match fixing scandal, I am a bit torn on it, and I just wanted to go over it quick in this video. Sean Garris came out, he had evidence that there was people contacting pro players that were on tier 2 North American teams, and after showing that evidence that there was in fact people contacting these players, asking them to throw games in exchange for money. He then went on to show some clips of Tier 2 North American games, and I do gotta say that this whole thing, I do kind of agree with the community at large that says that a lot of this evidence is pretty circumstantial. There are definitely some sus clips within that video, and Sean Garris could very well be showing these players cheating, and he did call out certain players in certain teams, and some teams have responded to it by suspending their players like FlyQuest Red. However, teams like Blue Otter, who are also included in that video, said that since the evidence isn't, solid, they're not going to suspend their players. So we do commend Sean Garris on trying to expose something in the community that would absolutely be very toxic to it. And this story isn't done. We could hear more things come out from Riot's own investigation, from any other investigation. Just like what was said on Platchat, I'm not sure if Riot is going to be able to prove anything without having access to the gambling websites, because this person that is contacting players, he could just be completely unsuccessful in doing so, and no players is actually taking his money. And all these clips could just be random moments of tier 2 players being not as good at Valorant as tier 1 players. That's very much what it could be. However, I do think one narrative that has come from this whole situation, partly from things that Sean Garris said, but just the situation at large, and I just completely disagree with it. Cheating would have happened without partnership. Partnership and the discussion around it is going to be a big part of this video, but I do want to say that cheating would have happened if this was not the case. I think one thing that some people who complain about tier 2 being in a bad state don't realize about tier 2 is that no matter what you do with tier 2, it's just simply not going to be as viewed as tier 1. It is not as important in the grand scheme of things when it comes to viewership, when it comes to sponsors, when it comes to anything like that. Tier 2 leagues are really hard to get right. Valorant is not the only game that has a struggling tier 2. It's very hard to draw interest for these tier 2 leagues. It's hard for the orgs to sustain paying players, which is something that a lot of people put on Riot, saying that partnership completely killed tier 2. It ruined everything, and everything is in shambles because we have a system where we have a tier 1 league in the whole ecosystem. And I reject that, because this kind of cheating has happened in other games. Look at Counter-Strike. The most famous match-fixing scandal of all time was in essentially Tier 1 North American Counter-Strike. It was the best North American team on the planet at the time in iBuyPower, playing a random game against a random team. Once everything was revealed, it ruined those players' careers. But just because that situation happened, it doesn't mean that people in Counter-Strike just stopped match-fixing. There was match-fixing controversy with players that ended up playing in Tier 1 Valorant. Marved, as well as some of the other players that played on that legendary Optic roster, were in match-fixing scandals before joining Tier 1 Valorant. Even if Riot had no control over Tier 1 or Tier 2, just completely let it go to TOs, there would be tons of random tournaments that don't really mean anything to a lot of the best teams, and people are going to throw those matches for money. And from what I've seen of this recent match fixing scandal in Valorant is the fact that these matches are Riot sanctioned. They are run by like separate companies, but they're Riot sanctioned challengers games. I think that incentivized a lot of players to not take that money. They don't want to ruin their chance at getting to a tier 1 team one day. They don't want to lose their spot in their current situation. Yes, some players are going to take that money, and maybe some did. We don't know for sure, like 100% who did and who didn't. Well, we know a couple of players that didn't. Those are the people that ended up going to Sean Garris about this situation. But that doesn't mean that everybody's doing that. And I think the reason for that is because these are Riot sanctioned matches and people don't want to get kicked out. But of course, partnership makes it hard for the tier 2 teams to make money. It makes it hard for them to pay their players. M80, one of the biggest organizations that was in tier 2 Valorant, they ended up not being able to pay their players and they had to pull out mid-season. So yes, there's a lot of problems that stem from partnership. I'm not going to deny that partnership has its flaws, but to say that this cheating scandal happens because, oh, everything's so locked up in Valorant, we have this tier 1 league that's like pushing everybody else down, and that's why there's cheating and all these scandals. So first of all, this cheating is not nearly as bad as things that we've seen in other games, but also, if anything, the partnership system de-incentivized players to take that money. So honestly, I really just don't understand that narrative, and I think it's the wrong thing to focus on when talking about this match fixing scandal. We'll see if any other big bombshells come out from this situation. Sean Garris definitely exposed that there was something going on and that there are people contacting players, but we need cold, hard proof of players that did it. There has to be more to this situation for us to start throwing blame everywhere when we don't even know if it's even that bad or not. Again, we'll see how far this goes, but again, I just think focusing on, oh, partnership bad is just the wrong way to go about this. That's the match fixing scandal part of it done. We're going to get to more regular topics, and that is constant complaining about meta shifts. So this is something that I see every single time there's a patch. This character's broken. Why wasn't this character nerfed? Why was this character buffed? Why is this happening? What's going on here? There'll be characters that during certain metas are going to be much more powerful than other agents, and then the community nonstop complains about it until those characters are eventually nerfed into the ground, and then a couple months pass, and then it's like, oh, what happened to this character? Now, I understand the community giving Riot feedback on what they do and don't like about the game. That is very important for us to do. As the players of the game, the developers need to know what the community likes and what they don't like. However, I do think that Valorant players, for as much as they play the game, just really seem to not like it. There are times where there have been agents far more powerful than other agents in the game. Chamber in 2022 comes to mind there. Tejo is the most recent example of that. He definitely needed a nerf. We'll see if the one that he got is going to be bad for the overall game or not. I think he was a bit too powerful, so I think it's fair what they did. But my problem is there's just everybody always complains. They're never truly happy with the game. No one hates Valorant more than Valorant players. There are people within this community that play the game a lot, engage with the community a lot, and they're just constantly complaining. Again, I think it's fine to give right feedback, but if you're just never going to be happy with how the meta is, if it's just not going to be what you want, and oh, take out this map's terrible, Breeze is the worst thing to ever exist, no, actually Icebox is, oh, they brought back Thatcher, oh, no, Thatcher sucks, get it out of there. There are very few people that are going to be 100% happy with how the game is, but I do think that Valorant is in a pretty decent state. I think Riot does a really good job at listening to community feedback. I know some people are going to find that laughable, but I genuinely believe that, because historically they have nerfed the characters that people do not like. So at the end of the day, I think give feedback, complain where you think it's absolutely necessary to complain, but realize that you're never going to be 100% happy with how the game is. And I don't want to say just don't play the game, because that's not a very productive way to have a conversation, but at some point, what else are you going to do but stop playing the game that you apparently don't like yet play all the time? I don't understand certain people's mindset on that. Moving on to something that definitely grinds my gears quite a bit, and that is the quote that I see under a lot of videos for both my videos and other people's videos: "You're biased against insert team/region." Me personally, I mainly watch the Americas. It is difficult for me to watch the other regions. EMEA is the second easiest reason to watch because those games start in the morning. Both Pacific and China start in the middle of the night for me, so it is hard to stay up to date on those regions, but I do the best that I can. I understand that as a person that is analyzing the game, analyzing the esport, analyzing these teams, I have to stay in the know. So I try my best to be as knowledgeable on these teams as much as I possibly can. But no matter how educated I am on a certain team or a certain subject about something that isn't in the Americas, there are always going to be people that come into my comment section and say, well, you're just biased towards Americas. You don't even watch this region. You don't know anything about this. Oh yeah, because that's a good way to have a conversation, is to just say, oh, you're biased, hee hee ha ha, and then that's it. Just, yeah, that's a great way to talk to someone. And it even happens within the Americas region. If I'm talking about Brazilian teams, and a lot of the Brazilian teams just aren't good right now, they really only have one good team, I will get comments saying similar things. You're biased against this region. You're underrating the LATAM teams. Oh, you just hate this team. It even happens within the Americas region. And I'm not saying that I'm without bias. Absolutely not. No one is completely without bias. It is nearly impossible to avoid, and it's very hard to be completely 100% objective. However, I assure you that I'm doing my very best to be as educated on regions that I don't follow as much as I possibly can. If it's an international tournament, I will do as much research on the teams as I can, especially if I haven't been able to see their games. I'll look back at their past games, I'll look at their stats, how their players are performing, who's on a heater, who needs to do better. I do as good as I can, and plenty of other creators do their best as well. But I also don't think that you need to know every single thing about a team to be able to talk about them. I don't think that's productive at all. I think it shuts down people from following the regions more, and it's just a deflective, annoying way to talk about the esport. If you want people to engage with your region, if you want people to talk about your region with, then talk to them. Don't just shut down any opinion that they have by just saying you're biased because you're not from here, or you're only following this league, you're not following this one. It doesn't matter. Just talk to them. If I'm saying something wrong, call me out. Please, I welcome it. I want people to tell me when I'm wrong. However, if it is something subjective, it's something that is opinionated, that I can back up, then you just saying, no, you're biased, you're wrong, it just doesn't add anything to the conversation. Anyway, I think I've made my point with this one. It's something I see a lot, and it can get frustrating for sure. Because at the end of the day, when it comes to teams that I cheer for, I do not care which region a team is from. Looking at the international tournaments from last year, I was cheering for Paper X at Madrid. When they went out during that grand final, I did kind of want Gen G to win that one. I was kind of happy either way, because Sentinels winning ended up doing a very good thing for my channel, because they're a very popular team and my videos got a good amount of views, especially for how many subs that I had at the time. At Shanghai, I was probably leaning most towards wanting G2 to win that one, because I had been following them since they were the guard. But then in the final, again, I was cheering for Gen G. I wanted Pacific to finally get that first trophy. And then at Champions, I was cheering for Team Heretics, because they had been through an absolute rainer of a year, just making it to grand finals regionally and internationally and just not getting it done. And I really wanted that to change, because it would have been a very good story. And Regaming ended up winning that one, so I think the overall story is teams that I personally want to win tournaments usually don't end up winning them. But thinking to tournaments in past years, in 2023 and 2022, I'm not just cheering for whatever America's team that I had been mainly following that time. I've cheered for Paper X at like 4 different tournaments, and they've let me down every single time. I've cheered for European teams. I wanted Fnatic to beat Loud in that grand final at Lock-In. My personal fandom of a team generally comes from teams that have really good stories. If G2 wins a tournament this year, that would be an amazing story. Going all the way through Tier 2, they were a Tier 1 team technically in 2022, but they just ended up falling short internationally and then just did not make franchising. They have a pretty solid year in 2024, but 2025, they're the best team in the league, and they lose the grand final of Bangkok. So if they end up winning Toronto, that's going to be amazing. But say if Team Heretics end up winning that tournament, that's going to be a great story too. You can look at teams like maybe even Jilai Gaming, an Ascension team in China that ended up having a player get cut for controversy. If they won, that'd be cool too. If Fnatic wins after having a pretty down year and losing Durka and having this rookie in Kayak and having a sub in for Leo, that'd be an amazing story too. There are so many different narratives that we can look at with these teams, and I'll generally just cheer for which one I think is the best one. So again, it's not about a team being from Americas or anything like that. I'm Canadian. I don't care about these American organizations. These are American teams with mostly American players or Latin American players or Brazilian players or whatnot. I only have one Canadian to cheer for at Toronto, and that's Jonah P. So again, it's not about where the orgs are from, it's about the teams themselves. Moving on to the next point, I'll try to make this one short because I really don't want to give it the time of day. The edating stuff is not nearly as big of a thing as what it's made out to be. One thing that is a common thing that people who aren't in the community or even in the community tend to harp on when it comes to like just dunking on Valorant is, oh, it's full of edaters. There's the whole herd jet, his sage thing. And listen, I'm not gonna pretend like I haven't seen it. Definitely seen it while playing the game, but I also don't think it's like a constant thing that is happening every single ranked game. Yes, these people can be cringe, but I just don't see this as that big of a deal unless they're being super annoying in game chat and ruining comms by going ooh woo and all that stuff. I really don't see this as like a massive problem, and it's just something that there seems to be a lot of focus on, especially with like edating content and stuff, which I definitely do not like at all. But I don't know, I just think this is one random thing that I wanted to talk about just because I don't see the point in focusing on it as much as people seem to do. Not as much these days, but it's definitely still talked about. Okay, so now we're getting into the main weeds of what I want to talk about in this video. Constant complaining about partnership slash franchising. So partnership came in 2023, and it was known for multiple years beforehand that that was the direction that the VCT was headed in. While there was Valorant esports going on in 2020, the main start of the VCT was 2021. That's when we had the first LANs, Reykjavik being the first tournament we've ever had. So 2021 and 2022 were essentially test runs for what would become the VCT Partnership League, where we have the 3, now 4 tier 1 leagues that have set main cities where we have a selected amount of organizations partnered with Riot to stay in this league, being in these hub cities, having most of the matches be played in front of a live audience. And when this was announced, I felt like I was the only one that was excited for it. I do not understand the esports community at large's fear of franchising. I understand that there have been times where it has been done poorly, and that is unfortunately most of the times that we've had it in esports. The Overwatch League being a very prime example of this. A huge league that was promised to be like the next frontier of esports, having teams based in cities, having live games at arenas in those cities. And because of that, and because of other situations that we've seen with franchising, there seems to be a pretty big fear around this format of esports tournaments. And while I understand that there are flaws with the system and certain things get pushed aside when it comes to partnership, I think that overall a partnership slash franchising system is good for Valorant. My main opinion on franchising is that it didn't ruin Valorant, it made the product better. Now, before I start typing in the comments super furiously, give me a second to explain myself. Listen, 2021 and 2022, we had some good times. We had some really good live tournaments. We had a lot of teams come out of nowhere and do well at these tournaments. Organizations investing tons and tons of money into this esport, making teams, making content for the game, and people loved those years of Valorant. I did too. That was when it started. That was when my love for the esport began. However, as many people point out that do come to the defense of partnership, is a lot of orgs were doing that for a chance at being a partner with Riot. So many organizations wanted to be a part of this franchise league because they knew that it would be pretty profitable, or at the very least a very prestigious place to be in the esports industry. So a lot of what you saw during those years was orgs doing certain things to have a chance at this league. And we've seen what Riot's been able to do with League of Legends, a game in esport that has its own flaws for sure, but still has maintained popularity as one of the biggest esports in the entire world for a game that is over 15 years old. That is incredibly impressive. So if there's something that Riot has proven, is that when it comes to esports and running esports, they're kind of the top dogs in the industry. Think about it. Valve kind of doesn't do much when it comes to Counter-Strike. They sponsor tournaments, but they generally just let ESL, PGL, and other organizations run the majors for them. I'm sure they give them money. I'm sure Valve has some sort of say in things, but overall, they kind of just let everybody do it. And a lot of people in Valorant, I feel like, have this victim mentality that Counter-Strike is so much better and we're so much worse. It frustrates me to no end for so many people in Valorant to be like, why are we more like Counter-Strike? Why can't partnership not exist? Why should we not run things like Counter-Strike? Counter-Strike is so successful. Look at Counter-Strike. Counter-Strike is one of the oldest FPS franchises in gaming. It has been around for over 20, nearly 30 years at this point. Different iterations of the game, different iterations of the esport. It is a game that has something that most other esports don't have: the benefit of time and longevity. One of the main problems with esports as a sustainable industry is the fact that games generally just don't last that long. And Counter-Strike, they don't really have their own franchising model. There are things like the ESL Pro League where like teams are basically like, it's kind of like partnership and it is kind of different but a bit more open. But people that want us to be more like Counter-Strike don't recognize that Valorant is a smaller game. Counter-Strike has its own problems that if Valorant were to copy, they would have the exact same issues. And a lot of them are issues that are just issues in all esports. Organizations being able to afford teams, hard for most esports, especially in team games. Keeping sponsors, cheating, match fixing, gambling, all this stuff. These are problems that Valorant does have and that Counter-Strike have had for a long time, but they kind of just deal with it because they will always be fine. Counter-Strike has one of like the biggest gambling rings in gaming ever, having tournaments funded by gambling companies that genuinely make the scene way worse for people. But no, VCT should just copy that, right? Just have it completely open, have Riot have no control at all, because it's always terrible for a developer to invest in their game. Again, I understand there are problems with partnership. I have my own problems with partnership, and I will dive deeper into that in this video and probably in a different video, but I refuse to believe that the problems that Valorant faces as an esport is all stemmed from the fact that Riot cared, that Riot ended up putting money into their esport. Riot is doing something with Valorant and League of Legends that most developers do not do. They put money into the game, they make it a tier 1 league, they make the product good. I love the VCT regular season games. Some of my favorite times throughout the year is just watching Stage 1 and Stage 2 because it feels like something that I want esports to be, a tier 1 product, a really good entertainment product that people can watch and be impressed with. Because before partnership started, what we had was a bunch of random teams play in this like open bracket style thing. We had some teams that were invited to just bypass that, and then we had in-region tournaments, and then those teams would qualify further. And yeah, that was fun. It made for some good stories like the Guard, and partnership definitely like suppresses that kind of openness. But generally, if I'm thinking back to how much fun I've had watching Valorant, it's kind of over the past 2 years. There's been some great tournaments. Riot really cares. I saw this one point that someone made. I don't know if he was a former player or something like that, but he was saying that sponsorships are now controlled by Riot, or Riot prevents teams from having certain sponsorships. Now, I'm not going to pretend like I know the inner workings of the VCT or that I know what teams and org owners are going to deal with. However, what I will say is Riot seems to be pretty open with what teams can have what sponsors. Like Crew has Visa, who's essentially a competitor of MasterCard, and MasterCard is a sponsor of the VCT. Teams generally can have whatever sponsors they want on their jerseys and whatnot. The main problem seems to be that gambling sponsors are not allowed right now. There were rules that kind of like made it more open, but we haven't seen a lot of teams do it yet. So my argument is, if they're blocking sponsors and the majority of those sponsors are gambling sponsors, do we want those sponsors in our community? I don't. I think sports betting is an absolute plague on the world right now. It's ruining sports, like, in general, because now everything's about a same-day parlay or a parlay during the game, and oh, this player has to do this, and now everything's based off of money. We can't just watch sports anymore. We have to use our money on it. Like, I watch hockey, and there's just constant ads for gambling, bet whatever, bet GG. Like, I don't want gambling sponsor. I will never take a gambling sponsor. If you see me take a gambling sponsor, I've fallen off the deep end. But don't worry, people, those sponsors are definitely going to come to Valorant at some point. Riot has already loosened up their rules about it a little bit. They're also now sponsored by Coinbase. So now we got crypto sponsors back because that went so well last time. Crypto money was so useful for the esports industry, and it did not go poorly at all. Just ask TSM. I just don't understand this immediate disdain for partnership and people seemingly not even giving Riot a chance with it. So many people just immediately wrote off partnership as this terrible idea and it's going to ruin tier 2 and it's going to ruin everything. Yes, you can say, oh, Riot just wants to do it for their own money. Yeah, but that's why publishers publish games. Do you want them to not invest their money? I know some esports communities don't want them to. I used to follow Smash Bros a lot, and people hate it when Nintendo steps in, but also Nintendo's just the worst when it comes to esports. I do not trust them at all. But Riot genuinely seems like they care, and it genuinely seems like they want the esports industry to grow. They're not the greatest at a lot of things, but I think that they do genuinely care and want the VCT to succeed and to make the esports industry better, because it will benefit them, it will benefit their partners, it will benefit their sponsors, it will benefit their players. Moving on to my next note, expanding on something I said earlier, there are flaws with franchising, but it's not the main issue. So my main issue with franchising is how it does make it pretty restrictive for tier 2 teams to make their way up. Even Leo Faria has admitted that when they reevaluate the VCT in 2027, they're probably going to have it be more open. They're going to have more Ascension teams. Maybe that ends up meaning less partner teams, which I think would be fine. I think if they do something like 8 partner teams, 4 Ascension teams, you have those 4 teams compete against each other and the other teams going for Ascension in a tournament at the end of the year. Something along those lines, just to open up the league a little bit more so that there's not complete openness, but at least something that would make it more worth it to put in the risk from these tier 2 organizations that probably aren't as rich as the tier 1 was. Just something to make it less risky for those tier 2 organizations to put forward the investment when there's only a handful of spots available. It would still make it risky even if there's 4 or 6 spots. Not everybody's going to make it, obviously, but I do think that's something that is going to change at the VCT, make it a bit more open, and I think that that's fine. But I think the main issue of the shortcomings of franchising is just the industry of esports in general is having a pretty tough time right now. Things are slowly getting better, but we are definitely not out of the quote esports winter as we were calling it a couple years ago. Things are slowly getting back to normal. Orgs were just spending way too much money before and it completely handicapped them for the future. But orgs are learning how to make money. But esports in general is a very hard industry to make money in. I already talked about sustainability within esports. Games don't really last that long. Even if the whole ecosystem was completely open, you would probably see the same exact organizations at the top. You would probably see 100 Thieves, Sentinels, Evil Geniuses, MIBR, Furia, G2, Fnatic. These are organizations that also have good teams in other esports. That is because they have the most money. They're the ones that have done the best job at learning how to make money. Maybe not some of the orgs that I mentioned, but a good amount of them. It is very hard to make money in this industry, and I think blaming Riot for making it harder for these other organizations to make money by having this tier 1, tier 2 organization system, I just don't see it as the reason why these organizations are struggling to keep their Valorant teams. Organizations drop teams all the time. It's hard to have a Counter-Strike team, it's hard to have a Valorant team, it's hard to have a team in any esport that is a team-based thing. Because it's expensive. You have to pay multiple people. If you're paying the minimum wage, you're still giving them like, what, 45K a year, 30K a year, something like that, and that is honestly not even a good salary. I've heard people say that there are esports players that are making like 50K and that's an overpayment. That is not that much money. That is barely livable wage. I don't even think it technically really is livable wage in some of these big cities like LA and Berlin. So I understand why some orgs are struggling. I don't necessarily blame the franchise league for it. In fact, I think the partnership league has made it easier for these big orgs to be sustainable. They're getting stipends from Riot, they're getting certain things like sponsors and other financial incentives from being in the VCT. Crew getting some really big sponsors like Visa. Messi ended up investing in the company as well. There's a lot of money in esports, but not a lot of money used correctly, and Valorant is no exception to that. And I do think this industry is going to find a way to make consistent money, and I think leagues like the VCT are going to be how it happens. But I think people are just way too impatient and want everything to work perfectly now, even when that is just not going to be the case. Riot can't just dump every single cent they have into esports because they're not going to get the return, and eventually it's just going to make everything collapse. So they do what they can with what they have. They could do it better. There could be some pretty big changes to the VCT that make it better. So we'll see how Riot ends up changing it, but I just think there are problems with the VCT that are more just industry problems, and Riot should be doing their best to fix those, obviously. But every time I see a Reddit post that's just Riot ruined Valorant with the VCT franchising system, I'm like, it's better now. It's better than it was in 2022 and 2021. I wholeheartedly believe that. It is a better product. It's more fun to watch. It's easier to follow. Again, those organizations would probably be at the top of the food chain anyway, because those are the organizations that have the most money, the ones that are already in franchising. There would definitely be more Cinderella runs of random organizations or random teams that would come in and impress everybody and maybe win a tournament here and there. But I don't think that being a possibility means that we should just have everything open just so that we can have those kinds of runs. And also those runs can happen in the VCT. Look at Evil Geniuses, an org that was really seemingly not investing in Valorant all that much and had a pretty bad team, and then they won champions just off of a whim. These things can still happen in franchising. We can still see these Cinderella runs. They happen. They already have. So as I already said, partnership should be more open, but Tier 2 would struggle either way. Tier 2 in general is just not a product that people are going to invest a lot of time in. I've already mentioned this early in the video, but I will say it again. People just will not care about Valorant that just isn't as good as Tier 1 Valorant. I feel like a lot of people that complain about how bad Tier 2 is don't actually watch Tier 2. They just assume based off the Ascension system that it must be bad and it's just a terrible investment for any organization to even try. Again, the top orgs with the most money will still have the best teams because they can pay the best players. In fact, they would probably do something like buy rosters from other organizations, buy up entire organizations to be able to have those teams. That's already a thing that has happened. But Tier 2 is kind of an unsolvable problem. Like, look at any minor league of any sport that you watch. Do you go and watch it? I mainly watch hockey. There's the NHL, then below that is the AHL, and then there's junior leagues and stuff like that. And I don't watch any of the minor league stuff or any of the junior league stuff. I just don't really care. I care about the NHL. I care about the Tier 1 product of the sport. And that's most people's mindset. These points were said on the episode of Placha by Wyatt River, who casts a lot of Tier 2 games. It's just kind of this unsolvable Rubik's Cube of how do you make people interested in something that's just not as good as the Tier 1 product. And I don't think that that would change if franchising wasn't a thing. Okay, this next statement might be a little bit controversial. So many orgs have left Valorant. Okay, so now listen, I'm not saying that organizations leaving Valorant is exactly a good sign or a sign of a super healthy ecosystem. What I will say is that I'm not surprised at all that a lot of organizations leave Valorant. A lot of organizations leave a lot of esports. A lot of them stop running teams in League of Legends, in Counter-Strike, in Rocket League. They'll drop players in Smash Bros. It's just kind of how it goes. For esports organizations to thrive, they need at least one esport where their team is really good. Preferably more, obviously, but look at Moist Esports, an organization that was basically burning money, but they had one of the best Rocket League teams at the time, one of the best Apex Legends teams. Obviously, there was a whole visa issue with all that stuff, but that organization, for what it was, and just run by a YouTuber, and they eventually merged with Shopify Rebellion, which I think was a really good move, it was really hard for them to sustain anything outside their top teams, because there's so much money that you need to be able to run these teams and not enough money coming back. Merch sales, sponsorships, and content creation can only get you so far. And I don't think that we necessarily need a billion different orgs to have Valorant teams for the ecosystem to be healthy. I don't think we need orgs, we need players. I think it's fine if a lot of the different teams in Tier 2 end up being either college teams or orgless teams, because what's going to keep the game running, what's going to keep the esports running, isn't necessarily these organizations that don't know how to make money. It's going to be the players playing the game, investing their time in the game, and investing their lives in the game. And yes, that is easier to do when you get paid to play the game, but I don't think it makes a ton of sense for Tier 2 teams to be paying their players a bunch of money for just like maybe a shot at being in Ascension. Again, the risk is really high, which is a problem that Riot needs to fix. But I think that Tier 2 orgs should be smart about how they're paying these players and definitely give them a salary, but maybe have something maybe based off of prize money for the most part. I don't know. I'm not the person that has to solve these issues. I would like to have better ideas on how to do it. But again, I don't think it really matters if we have a billion organizations within the game. I think what matters is that the top organizations and the top players are able to make it sustainable, and that the ecosystem below them is sustainable enough for players to keep coming up. And yes, Tier 2 orgs are necessary to do that, but I don't think that we need everyone to have a team, if that makes sense. And to move on to my last point, to wrap the video up, I do think that Valorant is genuinely in a pretty good spot, and the esport is growing. The viewership numbers are good, every region is growing, basically aside from EMEA, which is definitely a concern. I am worried about that, but overall, I think the game, I think it's balanced as well as it could be, at least within the current meta. I don't think there's a ton of super overpowered characters. Obviously, Teo was a problem, but he was nerfed. Yoru is probably up next for a nerf at some point. But I also don't think that Yoru is like unbeatable or anything like we saw with Chamber in 2022. I'm glad that people give feedback. I'm glad that people are passionate enough about this game and esport to complain. But I also think that sometimes they have to look at the bigger picture and realize it's not as bad as it may seem. And while I don't want to be out here defending a billion-dollar corporation, I do think Riot does a pretty good job with how they balance the game and how they run the esport. I'm glad that they've taken the risk to invest their money in making a tier 1 esport league. It is a huge risk. A lot of people hate them for it, but I think it's created a pretty good product. We'll see how it evolves and how they end up changing, but just know that Riot is going to listen to your feedback. They do listen to you. They look at Reddit comments. They look at Twitter comments. Don't think that they don't just because they're a big company. There will be changes, and your community feedback is what is going to influence that. So make sure that you are trying to put your best foot forward. And I wanted to make this video just to air out some things that I have to say about the community. I didn't want to make a video that's just me complaining about everyone. I don't want to come off as like I hate the community and everyone's wrong and I'm right. I just thought that there were certain things that I wanted to point out because it's frustrating to me how the game is talked about sometimes. But overall, I do still love the community. Every community has its problems. Every community has things that I disagree with. That's just kind of how it goes. But I wanted to share my opinions on this. Let me know in the comments down below. What did you think of this video? What did you think of anything that I said? Where do you disagree with me on? Where do you agree with me on? All that stuff. Where do you think I'm just a complete Riot shill or whatever? Say whatever you want. I'll definitely read it and let me know in the comments down below. What do you guys think? Where all the trailers and everything that we saw heading into the release of the movie looks pretty bad, but then the movie actually ends up being pretty good. But unfortunately for my sanity, that was not the case.